My alarm went off at 7:30 a.m., just like it does every day. I rolled over, got out of bed, and checked my phone. There was no messages. I stumbled into the bathroom and took a shower. Then I brushed my teeth and fixed my hair in the mirror. When I was finished, I went downstairs. The familiar smell of bacon and eggs was wafting down the hallway. I walked into the kitchen, and what I saw made me stop in my tracks. The man sitting at the table, reading the newspaper, was not my father. The woman at the stove preparing breakfast was not my mother. Both of them were strangers. I backed out of the kitchen and sat down at the bottom of the stairs to gather my thoughts. I was in shock, unable to take in what I had just seen. Who were those people? What were they doing in my house? Where were my parents? My mind was racing and my heart was beating fast. I didn't know what to do. Should I confront them? Should I call the police? Was I losing my mind? Just then, I heard the woman shout from the kitchen, "Honey, are you coming down for breakfast?" I sat there at the bottom of the stairs, unable to move, unable to answer. She called out again, "Honey, get up, your breakfast is going to get cold." A minute later, I heard footsteps coming down the hallway, and the man appeared. "Hey son, what are you doing sitting there? Breakfast is ready." Reluctantly, I got up and followed him into the kitchen. He sat down at one end of the table, and I sat down at the other. "What's the matter?" the woman asked. "Is there something wrong, son?" the man inquired. "Did you get enough sleep?" Yeah, I muttered in reply. The man went back to reading his newspaper. The woman put a plate of bacon and eggs on the table in front of me. I racked my brain. Maybe there was an explanation for all of this. Maybe they were just some long-lost relatives I have never met before. Maybe my parents had gone out for a walk. Maybe they were still asleep upstairs. Finally, I gathered up the courage and asked them a question. "Who are you?" The man smiled. "What kind of question is that?" he said. "Well, your parents, of course." My heart sank. I almost gave up hope. I couldn't process what was going on. Suddenly, my phone started vibrating. I took it out of my pocket and looked at the screen. It was a message from my father. I breathed a sigh of relief. Finally, I would have an explanation for what was going on. But when I opened the message, inside was just one word: help.
My little brother's name is Arthur. This afternoon, I pushed him into the pool. He fell in with a big splash and started making glug 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 sounds. Just when I thought he was about to drown, he managed to cry out for help, and Mom and Dad came running. Mom was crying because she thought that Arthur was dead. He wasn't. The doctor came and Arthur is doing very well now. He asked for cake with jam, and even though it was 8 o'clock and past his bedtime, my mother gave it to him anyway. Arthur was very happy and very proud with all the attention he was getting. Everyone was asking questions. Mom asked him how he had fallen into the pool, and Arthur just said he slipped. It was smart of him to say that. He knows Mom hates a tattletale. The other day when I was wrapping a skipping rope around his neck, he struggled out of my grip and ran to complain to Mom. He said I'd been trying to strangle him. Mom told him he shouldn't say such things and gave him a good spanking. When Dad came home and found out what Arthur said, he was also very angry. Arthur didn't get any dessert. Then he understood. This time he knew better than to tell Mom I had pushed him into the pool. I also asked Mom if I could have cake and jam. I asked her 3 times, but she pretended not to hear me. Maybe she suspects that I was the one who pushed Arthur. Before, I was always nice and kind to Arthur because Mom and Dad spoiled me as much as they spoil him. When he got a new toy car, I got a new doll. Mom would never give Arthur cake without giving it to me as well. But last month, Mom and Dad completely changed. Now they devote all their attention to Arthur. He gets gifts all the time. It made him very big-headed. He was always a bit of a pain in the neck, but now he's insufferable. He's constantly asking for this and that. Mom and Dad always give him whatever he asks for. The only thing they scolded him was the day I tried to strangle him with a skipping rope. That was funny because, for once, it wasn't his fault. I wonder why Mom and Dad suddenly stopped loving me. It looks like I'm no longer their little girl. Whenever I kiss Mom on the cheek, she doesn't even smile. Dad is the same way. When they go for a walk, I always tag along, but they don't pay any attention to me. If I'm playing on the road or doing something dangerous, they don't even care. Arthur can be nice occasionally, but most of the time, he refuses to play with me. The other day I asked him why Mom and Dad had become so cold to me. He looks up at me with a sly smile and refuses to answer. He did it on purpose to enrage me. That was the day that I wrapped the skipping rope around his neck. I was so mad that despite the spanking he had received, I went into his room afterward and told him that I would kill him. This afternoon he told me that Mom and Dad and him were going to the seaside and that they weren't bringing me with him. Then he laughed and stuck out his tongue and made faces at me. So I pushed him into the pool. Arthur is sleeping now and Mom and Dad are watching TV. The skipping rope was just lying in the garden, so I picked it up. In a moment I'll sneak into Arthur's bedroom, and this time I will give him a chance to scream. That way, Mom and Dad will be forced to go to the seaside without him. And after they leave, I'll go to the end of the garden and climb back into that horrible white box that they buried me in. When I was younger, there was an abandoned building at the bottom of our street. All of the kids in the area kept well away from it, because the rumor was that it was haunted. The concrete walls of the old 2-story building were cracked and crumbling. The windows were broken and shards of glass lay all over the floor inside. One evening, as a test of courage, my best friend and I decided to explore the creepy old place. We climbed in through the window. At the back of the building, the whole place was dirty and there was a layer of mud on the wooden floor. As we dusted ourselves off, we looked up and were shocked to see that someone had written the words, "I am dead," on the wall near the ceiling. Probably just some teenagers trying to scare kids. Yeah, probably. We explored more of the rooms on the ground floor. In the room that appeared to have once been a kitchen of sorts, we found more writing on the wall. It read, "I am in a room upstairs." We walked up the creaking stairs to the second floor. I led the way and my friend followed close behind. I wasn't scared, but he was beginning to get a little jittery. When we came to the top of the stairs, we turned left and walked cautiously down the narrow hallway. At the end of the hallway was a closed door with some more ominous writing on it. "You will find me in this room." By now, my friend was shaking with fear. I was quite creeped out too, but I didn't want to show it. He told me he didn't want to go any further, but I insisted, telling him there was nothing to be afraid of. I turned the handle and the door creaked open. We stepped into the room and found it empty. There were only 2 closed doors on either side. There was more creepy writing on the wall. "My head is on the left, and my body is on the right." As soon as my friend saw this, he completely lost his nerve. He turned to run away. I caught hold of his arm, but he shook me off and fled out through the open door. I heard his footsteps disappearing off down the hallway. I was determined to be brave and overcome my fear, mustering all my courage. I opened the door on the right and walked inside. I walked to the other side of the room, and on the wall, written in tiny letters, were the words, "My body is underneath." I looked down at the floor. I was standing on some more writing on the floorboards. I stepped back and saw the words,
"My head is coming from the room behind you. Turn around."
I heard the door behind me creaking and quickly turned. There was a shadow moving behind the door. Suddenly something rolled into the room and came to a rest against the wall. It was my friend's severed head. His dead, sightless eyes seemed to stare at me. I screamed in horror and I flung myself. out through the open window, and I fell 2 stories to the ground. I landed on my side, breaking my arm. In horrible pain, I ran home, crying and yelling for my parents. The police were called and they searched the old abandoned building. At first, they didn't find anything. There wasn't even any writing on the wall. They combed the house from top to bottom but didn't find any traces of my friend. Then they priced up the floorboards. His body was lying underneath. They never found his head.
I left my country for a fresh start, got into a new school. I made new friends, and I looked for an apartment. I don't like living in hostels with boys. So I rented an apartment near my campus. I got it at a low price. Oh well, what a lovely spacious apartment this is. Here I will have some fun time with my new friends. I spent my day making arrangements at my apartment. And it was finally my first night. Lying on my bed, suddenly, I heard the sound of walking on the street. Some children were singing a strange song. Rose is red, violet is blue. You better run before it comes to you. Man, that was weird. I neglected those children and slept peacefully. Suddenly, I started feeling cold. I heard the sound of the door opening. I could hear those kids. Some song from afar. I woke up in a panic, wondering if there was anyone in my apartment. When I turned my head, a terrible clown stood in the front of my bed with a bloody knife in his hands. Ah! I ran as fast as I could, and everything went black. I woke up. Oh my God, it was a nightmare. The next morning, I was in the toilet checking my phone. I found something that scared me badly. A picture of me sleeping, although I slept alone.
I remember waking up one night to the sound of scratching coming from inside my bedroom. Rubbing my eyes, I sat up and listened again, placing a hand on my ear. The sound seemed to be coming from inside the walls, and it was moving. I was a curious little girl back then, so I got out of bed and followed the noise out of my room and down the hall. My parents were fast asleep, so I had to tiptoe the entire way. The sound led me all the way down to the basement. Opening the basement door, I descended the stairs and followed the sound to a crawl space I didn't even know I had. Since I'd already come this far, I got down on my hands and knees and crawled inside. It was dark and cramped, but I kept crawling until the sound suddenly disappeared. I paused for a moment when I heard a loud squeak behind me, and quickly looked over my shoulder. To my absolute horror, a pack of rats were standing right behind me, blocking the way I came. I screamed and started crawling further into the tunnel as the rats gave chase, hungrily snapping their teeth behind me. Eventually, I came to a dead end. I rolled onto my back and watched as the rats slowly approached me. I raised both of my feet off the floor and bent my knees back, preparing to kick them if they got too close. Stay back, or else, I stuttered. But the rats weren't scared of me. Why would they be? Nosy little girls didn't come down here that often, so I must have looked like an all-you-can-eat buffet. Tears ran down my cheeks as I lay there, trembling, feet raised in the air, waiting for them to attack, as if to taunt me. The rats kept snapping their teeth. The closer they got, suddenly they lunged at me, ready to feast. And that's when I woke up. I was relieved it was all a dream, until I heard a sound. under my bed.
Subscribe Horror Black Candy for more videos.
It was a hot summer when I went hitchhiking around the country. I was looking for adventures to tell my friends who chose a boring summer job instead, and took only a small backpack with me on the journey. It started out smoothly. I easily got out of the city and soon I was 100 miles away from home. All of the drivers had interesting stories to tell, and I found myself falling in love with hitchhiking in a matter of days. I stayed at a hotel, and as I reached more rural lands, I slept in a barn twice in a row. It got a little harder to find cars that agreed to take me with them, which I understood. But even as the drivers got more cautious about taking strangers with them in more remote places, I didn't feel like anything but adrenaline and freedom. At last, I was able to get a ride, and I asked the woman if she knew a place to stay. She told me I was in luck. She was on her way to work as a receptionist in a hotel. It was next to a graveyard, though, she said, and I laughed before brushing it off. After all these hikes, a graveyard should be the last thing to scare me. We reached the hotel, a small white building with angelic status all over the terrain. Tall grass and wildflowers grew everywhere and gave the place something peaceful, as if barely touched by humans at all. I checked in and thanked the woman for the drive. After having slept on hay for 2 days, I finally felt how exhausted I was when I opened the room and dropped on the bed first. The clean, typical smell of hotels surrounded me, and feeling safe and tired, I quickly fell asleep. It was nighttime when I opened my eyes again, and I realized the moonlight had woken me. I got up to close the curtains and glanced at the graveyard underneath my window. The statues and graves bathed in the moonlight. A quiet and beautiful sight. I opened the window to hopefully lose some heat and went back to sleep. Thunder awakened me next. I sluggishly opened my eyes, being woken up in the middle of my deep sleep. The curtains blew in the wind and the moonlight had disappeared, leaving my room pitch black, and suddenly, cold. I sat up slowly, picking up the sounds of rain tapping on the window, as well as reached for my nightlight. The same tapping sounds froze my hand midair. Those sounds couldn't be caused by rain? "Who's there?" I called, and I immediately realized how stupid that was. I slept on the third and highest floor of the building. There couldn't be anyone outside. The tapping became a shrill noise, like metal scraping against glass, and I put on the nightlight before getting out of the bed. The tapping stopped. I shoved the curtains aside. There was nothing there, and soon I thought it must have been my own imagination. With my hand on the handle to close the window, I looked down at the graveyard, and my heart stopped. A dark figure stood amid the gravestones, his face in shadows, until he suddenly looked at me. He jumped onto the building and began crawling his way up like a lizard. He got up so fast that he was able to get face to face with me in a matter of seconds, and I slammed the window shut, barely in time. The creature watched me silently, scraping with his yellow nails across the glass, and for a minute there was nothing else I could do than just look at its horrible face. Skin hung in shreds from his face, and his eye sockets were filled with insects crawling out to enter his smiling mouth with rotten teeth. Trembling with fear, and my heart high up in my throat, I finally turned around and left the room. Automatic lights jumped on in the hallways, and I dashed down the stairs. I ignored the strange darkness of the reception hall and headed for the exit, but an obscure figure froze me in my tracks. Her empty sockets stared at me. A smile plastered on her lips, and with shock I realized that it was the woman who'd given me a ride. She
She sat very still, as if held upright with strings, and flies buzzed around her face. I nearly held in a scream and quickly continued my way out, never once looking back. The rain still poured from the sky, and the angelic statues had gotten something malicious in the stormy night. I ran across the terrain to get to the road and felt a rush of relief when two headlights appeared in the distance. The car slowed down by the side of my waving arms, and I quickly got inside when I heard the locks open. The car immediately locked again and started driving. I wanted to apologize to my driver for stepping inside his car, soaking wet, but my voice failed me.